The great downtuning debate. Thick string, thin string. Time to settle it once and for all. Metal Bass Monday. So, channel updates. I have, as I mentioned before, opened up a Discord server. It's also going to coincide with I've set up some Patreon, some Subscribestar, and another network that my stuff's going to start appearing on, doing some shows that I can't really do that much on YouTube, that kind of thing. But I'm going to set up a membership thing, and we're going to have some Discord chats and live stuff and all kinds of new cool stuff coming. I thought about debuting it this episode, but it's probably going to wait till next time because I got to do some traveling in between, and I want to make sure that I'm in a stable location to kick off some of these incentives and some of the cool community stuff. So wouldn't want to announce it and then instantly be unavailable. So bad move. And speaking of community, the Facebook group, also linked down below. That's gotten off to a great start. I'm really enjoying it. If you're not already, please head on over there and join in the conversations. There's been some really cool stuff, and it really helps me kind of know what's on everybody's mind and some stuff I should address maybe sooner rather than later, that kind of thing, and let you see what's going on with the channel in between episodes and in between demos and things, so you know kind of what's in the works and why some things take longer and some things come out faster. So head on over there. And one last thing. I've been looking at my stats a lot lately, and what I'm seeing is a lot of subscribers aren't getting the notifications. Actually, a lot of my views are starting to come from not subscribers and from just random people who come on it or suggested things. So it tells me YouTube isn't sending out those alerts. So if you haven't already, please subscribe down below. There's a lot coming up, and you're going to want to catch up on it. There's stuff that genuinely you're not going to see on any other channels. I know because I've researched. If you have subscribed, make sure you hit notifications and hit the bell. You don't get the notifications unless you jump through all the hoops they make you do. But hit all that up and make sure we're in touch, because there's definitely some really cool stuff coming up that I've got some other people coming in and adding input, and it's going to be completely unique to the channel. So psyched about it, and you'll also get alerts about where to find the other shows that I'm doing. So with that in mind, let's get to some string stuff. So one of the consistent raging debates, especially in metal bass, I see all over forums and stuff, is about drop tuning, especially if you're playing a 4 and you're dropping down to get those 5 string level notes, and what string gauge you have to be able to do it. Rule number 1 is there are no rules in metal, so stop thinking that you have to follow rules. 2 is stop getting all your information from the internet. Most people are just parroting things that their favorite musician told them, and they've never actually done the experiments themselves and don't know what they're talking about. So stop listening. You really need to figure this out for yourself, but hopefully this video will let you hear some of the things and start kind of guiding you down the path. And so let's talk about what happens if you drop, say, a lighter gauge string to get certain notes versus moving up to a heavy gauge. Now, the first thing to think about is your tension. That's the biggest thing that's going to change as far as feel, as far as how your bass is set up, and as far as your technique goes. Because if you take a lighter string and drop it, it's going to become much more flexible. It's not going to have the same level of taut tension that you would get out of a higher gauge string. Some people like that. I actually don't like super tight strings myself. I like a little bit of what happens when you detune a string, which we're going to hear soon. But I also, I might go up a little bit if I drop tune, but I'm not myself a fan of the really heavy string gauges, because something else starts to happen too. And it's especially noticeable for pick players, is that you start losing pick attack. That there's 2 things that happen when you hit a note. You have a fundamental, which is the actual note, and then you have the overtone series, which are the little harmonics that add to the fundamental and give the tone its color. The heavier the string, the louder the fundamental. So it's going to get more of a bloated, larger, thicker kind of bottom end, you may want that if you go for that kind of sound. If you're looking for a much more aggressive sound, it may not be your choice. And again, this all will be affected by your setup too. How you're dialing your sound is going to make a big difference in your string choice. This is why you can't listen to anyone else. They're not playing with your style, with your technique, through your gear. Everything counts in the signal chain, but the strings do make a big difference. So for this experiment, what I thought we would do is, I've got my 5-string here, and what I did was take the low B string and tune it up to C. So it's not that varied in tension. It's just up a little bit, so you're going to hear it pretty much as it is. And this is a 135. So this is the heaviest string I would ever use, and because a lot of times I have this string, or this bass rather, in A, sometimes A flat, in a drop tuning, that's why I made it a little heavier. If I were going to keep this in B standard all the time, I'd go lighter than that. My choice. What I've done with the E string, though, is I've taken that and dropped it down to C as well. So there's a good median point going on here. So we've got the same set of strings, same brand, on the same bass, and we're going to be able to hear what the difference is in between a light gauge tuned down and a heavy gauge played pretty close to pitch. So again, this string is going to be a little looser and a little more flexible. It's going to move with you a little bit. This one is going to be a little heavier, and it's going to take a bit more to pull it. The other thing that this is going to make a difference in is how you set up your bass. It is easier to get really super low action with heavier strings, but it also means that you're going to get that change in sound. I don't find it that big a deal. If you get somebody who knows how to do a good setup, or you're good yourself, you can get a really good setup, with a looser string. You just have to, fudge it a little bit more. You can go either way, but heavier is going to allow, at a simplistic level, you to get lower action without having to fuss with it quite as much. So with that out of the way, let's hear C played with a drop-tuned E string, and this is going to be a 105. So. Okay, so let's hear a 135 tuned to the same note. There's a difference there. Surprisingly, to a lot of people, there isn't as much of a difference as you might think. Some people say there's this wild, humongous difference. It's different in a couple crucial places, but it's not utterly a different sound. It's what frequencies are enhanced one versus the other. So what I did while I was playing is I did an EQ match, which means I had one frequency analyzed and then the other one, and then match them against each other so we can see what the EQ difference is in between the two strings, rather than just hearing it sound and guessing it. Let's check it out. So this EQ graph shows the difference in between a light string as opposed to a heavy one. As you can see, there's a lot more center mids. You have things in about the 500, 1K, and about 280 going into 300. You also have a cut in the sublows. There's surprisingly a little bit of a cut in the extended highs. What that's showing you is that when you down tune a lighter gauge string, it's going to have much more center mid content than when you play a heavier gauge string. Now, if we invert it to kind of make sense of this, if you were to put a heavy gauge string versus a light, what you would see is the heavy gauge has much more sublows down in the 70, 50, and 30 range. It's a little scooped out in the low mids and center mids. has a tiny bit around 3K, and then kind of a way upper range where you're really not going to hear it that much around 10K hit. So basically, it's more scoop. You lose some center mids with a heavier gauge string. That totally makes sense with what's going on and how we're hearing this. So that also gives you a little bit of a guide of EQ, depending on what string choice you're picking and what's right for you. If you're going after a more scooped sound, maybe having, heavier strings where you're just going to get lows and highs out of it is where you want to go. If you want to keep more mid content into it, doing maybe the drop tune with lighter gauge strings is better off for you. Or conversely, you could take either one and change your EQ to kind of get a balance of the both. So say if I wanted to, play this 135, but I wanted to get a bit more of a little bit of that more twang out of it, then I know what I have to do is go in around 500 and 1K and boost up a little bit to bring back what I'm losing by having such a heavy gauge string. So it's not something that's really going to be, life or death either way. So when a lot of guys, and I find it's a big guitarist thing, they'll say, oh, you got to have these super heavy strings, and they tend to want more fundamentals because they consider you more of a backing instrument, so they want you to sit in the bottom and basically create the bass that their instrument doesn't always complement. But if you want to cut through, maybe lighter gauge is better for you and a little boost in the sub-lows. It's totally up to you, but now you kind of get and understand what happens in between these two dynamics, and it really is just going to come down to preference. Now, one of the other things is that they say that, well, it makes it too sloppy, or it does this, and that's crap again too. You have to adapt your technique to what you play. When I changed from 4 to 5, I changed my technique, so if I went from light to heavy, I would probably change my technique too, to be able to get different results out of it. If I'm going to be playing on a down tune, E string and having a bit more of a loose thing, I'm probably going to use a bit more of an exacting or lighter touch on it to make sure I'm not bending notes out, or I'm not, really just clacking down on the fingerboard. With heavier strings, I might play a little more aggressive, or if I'm picking, it might make a little more sense because, with a pick, you don't have as much control over exactly where you are, and it's doing a back and forth rather than something where you have a little bit more tight focus on the attack and a bit more of an ability to control how round it gets. So there are no rules. Don't let anybody tell you one has to happen over the other. Listen to this, try it out yourself. Get a 5-string, dial it into your own gear, but this is pretty much going to be consistent. You will get these results if you drop a E string down to C versus, using a heavier string for it. You're going to get more mid presence at the same note. If you're using a heavier string, you're going to have more of a scoop sound, a little bit of extended high, and a lot more sub-low. So the choice is yours. Make sure you're doing what's right for how you play and how you sound. And most importantly, what other gear you're using in the chain and what it's enhancing. So, mystery solved. Go forth. Have fun. Do your own thing. Listen to no one but yourself. Keep your own counsel. Crush it. Gather round, children. The old man of the sea, Uncle Rodney's going to tell you a story about crappy bass tone. Since we're talking about this type of sound, I thought I would share with you something that I think will serve you pretty well. And I think if you're trying to help people out, educate, teach, or even just share an idea, your main goal is to save other people time, to not have to go through the same crap that you did to come to a certain realization or a point. So that's what I'm going to try and do here. This is the experience I wound up having to go through getting my tone together, especially in one place that bothered me literally for years. And it just goes to show why I always emphasize experimenting yourself and not listening to other people and doing the process of discovery, because you not only find out what you like, but you find out all the stuff that doesn't work for you too. And that's important because it keeps you from always messing around with things or wasting a ton of time with options that just aren't going to work. So my enemy was fret noise, and it wound up being solved in exactly the last place I thought it would be. So here's the story. When I first started playing, and in my early years, and when I first started touring, I played with a pretty different sound than I do now. I used to like very much more warm, punchy type of sounds. I liked guys like Bob Daisley, and I wanted something that had a real drive, and I also liked really heavy sub. I like, just thunderous bass under things, these big like earthquake tones that didn't have the kind of top end or aggression that I tend to play with now. So my biggest enemy during this was I wanted that sound, but I also wanted a little bit of grime in the sound and to sound kind of rock and roll. And what wound up getting me all the time is fret noise, because I played much cleaner than I do now. I would get this click all the time, and I couldn't stand it. It would drive me out of my mind. I hated the clickiness. Even back then, like as much as I loved Iron Maiden, one of the things that bothered me about Steve Harris's tone was I could hear this click all the time, and I didn't like it. I loved his core tone, but I kept going, why doesn't he get rid of that clicking noise? To me, bass just didn't need to have that typewriter thing going on top of it. So I started using heavier and heavier strings, which back then there weren't nearly the same options. So, I'm having to special order strings, all this stuff. And that didn't quite do it. So then I kept raising the action until my strings are this high off the fingerboard. And, it's the chops that I had back then from touring and playing with this ridiculously high action. I probably would have do that today and I'll have tendonitis in under 2 months. But, back then I'm like crushing full beer cans and walnuts with my hand. But even that didn't work. And the funny thing is, it actually made it more irritating because the fret noise then wasn't consistent. I would be playing and everything would sound great, and then I'd get down towards the end of the neck or something, and one exuberant note, and all of a sudden, click, that noise would come out, and it would stick out like crazy, and that drove me nuts. And I tried EQ, I tried compression, I tried like everything I could think of, and it just wouldn't work. Because a lot of times I would EQ and get my ideal sound, and then that one note where I hit a little too hard and that clack came through, it would come through like a spear right through the audio spectrum. And it bummed me out for ages. I couldn't figure out why all these guys had these great, punchy, aggressive sounds that I loved, but I couldn't get them without having these random clicks that would just pop up. Eventually, ironically, I figured it out when I started going for more aggressive sounds. I started hearing like Eddie Jackson from Queensryche and stuff like this, where there was this more gurgling and gain and some drive in the sound. One thing I started to figure out was that drive actually softens some of those areas, and it starts ironing that out. And then finally one day, through experimenting constantly, the magic thing hit me. It was that I had to put my action actually really low so that I got consistent fret noise all the time, so that every note went click. I needed to seek it out and make it happen. Then EQ my bass from that position. Instead of EQing from my ideal sound and have click be this thing that came in and invaded it, I made click happen all the time and then learned how to dial it out. So it was almost like I had to take my enemy and make them 100% present, and then learn how to overcome, dial in my sound and overcome it by it being present all the time so I could hear it and kind of negate its effect. So this is why experimenting is so difficult, and why sometimes you have to go in the opposite direction you think and the opposite direction that you're being told, everybody told me at the time, you got to raise your action, you got to play heavier strings. It wasn't until I ignored everybody and started using a more aggressive sound, went for low action, and really had it, laying on the fingerboard almost, and then adjusted my EQ from that position, that I finally started getting the sound that I went, that's it. What this really, I'm hoping, drives home is that the need to experiment is also finding out about yourself, and it's finding that thing that nobody else is going to tell you. There are some revelations and secrets that you're just not going to find by presets, by internet forum advice, by all this stuff. You've got to sit down with your instrument and treat it like a great puzzle and just go and investigate it. So this is what happened to me, and I wound up solving it by kind of having to shake hands with and embrace my enemy. Ironic. So what'll be interesting is, have you ever had a moment like this? Have you had something where you fought with it and the answer to it turned out to be the complete opposite of the direction you were looking, or the last thing you would have expected? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. I always like this stuff and hearing about it in people's journeys. And also, you never know when that answer might be the one someone else has been staggering around in the fog looking for. So share those ideas down below, and you never know, the one you're looking for may come from someone else's comment. So that's the old man of the sea for this session. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm really looking forward to the new stuff and adding it into the community. Join me on Facebook, join me on Insta. I got stuff coming out on Instagram, some new playing examples and things that aren't long enough for YouTube things, and you'll only catch them there. So I will see you there. I will see you in the comments. Be well. I'll see you next time.